Hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for today's webinar, which will be all about creating and managing a successful science blog. Before we get started with the usual housekeeping, it's always nice for us to know in real time where it is you're joining us from. So if you use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen, just say a quick hi, let us know where it is you're joining us from this morning or afternoon. As always, I have a couple of quick notes about how to get the most out of the session. We are recording today, so if you miss anything, then don't worry. We will be sending a recording out in the next 24 hours for you to catch anything that you miss or to share with colleagues who couldn't be here with us today. We want it to be as useful as possible, so if you do have any questions, then please use the same Q&A box you're using now and ask questions at any time, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. We, of course, want to know your thoughts and feedback as well, so please participate in the polls, check out and download the additional resources from the handout section, and we ask that you kindly take 30 seconds at the end of the webinar to share your feedback with us. We want these webinars to be as useful as possible for you, so please do share with us your thoughts. Finally, if you do have any tech issues, these are usually resolved by a quick refresh of the browser. If that doesn't work, send us a message and we'll get you back up and running as quickly as possible. Now, today's session, we're going to be splitting into 3 mini presentations and 2 Q&As. I'm delighted that we're joined by Benedette, first of all, over in Connecticut. Benedette is a research associate at Yale and has been writing for AZO Network for over 5 years. And in that time has written hundreds of scientific articles, and will be talking to us today about the importance of scientific writing. Ben, who is joining us from the Manchester office today, will be discussing SEO tips for blog writing. In his day job, he manages the content for over 50 clients, producing 1 to 4 pieces of content per client per month, equaling out at over 4,000 blog and pages that he oversees each year. And Emily, who is the editor-in-chief of our latest website, AZO Life Sciences. Emily has conducted over 130 interviews with industry leaders from many organizations, including the United Nations and the World Health Organization, and also manages sites with over 10 million users per month. So thank you to the 3 of you for sharing your time and expertise with us today. And wonderful to see that we've got people joining us from all over the place. So from Cambridge, Manchester, Cambodia, wow, Cambodia, Mansfield, Munich, Liverpool, happy Ben, San Francisco, Madrid, Florida, Switzerland, USA, Michigan, Massachusetts, Kansas, and many more. So thank you guys for taking the time to join us. We've got 3 great speakers with an abundance of experience. They're going to be sharing their thoughts and ideas with you, and this webinar will be a success from our point of view if you leave today and we've got you to think about at least one area of your marketing strategy. So please take part, share your thoughts, and enjoy the session. And like I said, questions at any time are very welcome, so please do send those in as soon as they come to mind. I'm now going to hand over to Benedette, who's going to get things started for us.
Hi, everyone. So like Danny said, I am currently a research associate at Yale, but I've also been a freelance writer for AZO for quite some time. So I just wanted to begin introducing the topic of the importance of scientific writing by first clarifying what scientific writing is and how that compares to scientific journalism. So by definition, scientific writing is the technical writing that scientists use to communicate their research to others. So about 24 million scientific and medical peer-reviewed papers have already been published, with about 1.8 million new articles being published each year. And I'm sure that number has increased quite a bit due to the coronavirus and the amount of publications that have been produced on that topic. So in these papers, the authors often describe their work in a way that reflects the scientific inquiry method. So it demands a certain level of precision that's similar to what's demanded during the research process, but rather in a written form. So when you compare scientific writing to scientific journalism, the latter describes how writers convey the information that's often presented in those peer-reviewed articles to the general public, who may or may not be familiar with these topics. So one important distinction between scientific writing and scientific journalism that I wanted to emphasize was the difference in the audiences who are reading these publications. So the majority of the audience who's reading scientific writing are likely to be professional scientists who are in similar fields, which is comparable to the audiences for scientific journalists who, as I mentioned, can just be anyone who's interested in learning more about the topic at hand. So a really important aspect in both scientific writing and scientific journalism is the type of sources that you use to get your information from, aside from whether you're presenting your own research or not, especially in scientific writing. So typically these sources are divided into two categories as either primary or secondary sources. So primary sources will typically provide information on the original research. So that can be in the form of experimental data, laboratory notes, presentations that have been given at professional conferences, technical reports, patents, as well as peer-reviewed scientific journal articles. So comparatively, secondary sources will often discuss information on the discoveries that have already been reported, typically that have been reported in the primary sources. So this can be in the form of review articles, scientific encyclopedias, or textbooks. So for me, when I'm beginning to write an article, I like to begin with the secondary sources, especially review articles I find to be really useful. Since they give a lot of background information on the topic, and that helps me to properly introduce these topics to the reader. So once I get a better understanding of how important that topic is, I like to move on to the primary sources like peer-reviewed articles, especially so I can get specific information on the studies that have been published on this topic. And I really like to just focus those peer-reviewed articles on those that have been published in the 5 years, just in case anything has changed since its original discovery. So the scientific writer is often communicating highly technical information to an audience that may or may not be familiar with these topics. So therefore, it's important for the scientific writer to begin any paper or article with general background information on the topic. So for the purposes of this presentation, I wanted everyone to imagine that you've been assigned to write an article on why remdesivir has been successful in the treatment of COVID-19. So some of the questions that you, the scientific writer, should answer in this initial segment of your article should include: what is COVID-19? How many people have been affected by COVID-19? Why is it important to treat COVID-19? And are there any treatments that are currently available or have been approved for the treatment of COVID-19? So once this information is provided to the reader, you, the scientific writer, again, can use 1 or 2 sentences to briefly introduce what is remdesivir into the article. So in my opinion, these 2 sentences are really the most important sentences throughout the entire article, as the reader at this point will decide whether they want to continue reading the article or just move on to another website. So you really want to make sure that you're pulling the reader in to want to learn more and continue reading. So once you have the introduction of the article completed, there's several paragraphs within the article that will typically be used to provide details on the topic and their significance to the reader. So generally, each paragraph should include 1 topic sentence, with the remaining sentences in the paragraph supporting or elaborating on that topic sentence. All of the paragraphs within the article should also be organized around section headings or subheadings as appropriate. And by breaking up the article into these organized sections, the reader has an easier time reading through a lengthy article that doesn't necessarily appear to be so long. And one thing that we like to do in NewsMed and a lot of the other AZO websites is that we incorporate relevant pictures and even YouTube videos as appropriate into the article. So again, this not only helps the reader visually by breaking up the article, but it's also just more aesthetically pleasing to see pictures and just not feel like you're reading something so long, in my opinion. So it's also very important for scientific writers to use effective transitions between any sentence, paragraph, or section within the article. So engaging transitions should also be used within sentences to ensure that the entire article flows really well together. So I just wanted you to consider the following few sentences discussing the biological functions of DNA. So here the writer writes, DNA is vital for all living beings, even plants. It is important for inheritance, coding for proteins, and the genetic instruction guide for life and its processes. DNA holds the instructions for an organism's or each cell's development and reproduction and untimely death. So although the information provided in these sentences is clear and accurate, the sentences just feel a little bit choppy, and I don't feel that they flow really well together. So even in the last sentence, you can see that there's like a lot of ands, and that just adds a lot of bulk to the sentence that's just really not necessary and doesn't add anything of substance to the article, to those two sentences. And there's also a bit of abrupt wording that could just cause the reader to lose interest or feel bored while they're reading, which nobody wants. So then my attempt to rephrase those few sentences is here. So what I wrote instead was, DNA is essential for maintaining the life of all organisms. DNA contains the genetic information that allows for the inheritance of genes, coding of proteins, and many other biological processes. Taken together, DNA provides the genetic instruction guide for life, beginning with the development of each cell, their reproduction, and ultimately their death. So while the information in these two paragraphs, the one from before as well as this one that I edited, remain the same, the way in which they're written and shared to the reader differ considerably. So by getting a little bit more creative with the way in which you share and discuss the scientific information, the reader might feel more engaged, hopefully feels more engaged, when they otherwise may not have been too interested in the subject at hand. So you always want the reader to be more interested, have questions that hopefully your article can answer to them, and hopefully just continue to scroll through your site and read on subjects that might be similar or even learn something new. So with that, I'll pass it to Ben, who will discuss how writers write for Google.
Hey guys, thanks for having me here. As Danny said, I am Ben. I'm the content marketing manager for AZO Network. Whereas Benedetta and Emily work on the NewsMed site and AZO Life Sciences, I work on the client side of things. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to leverage content for clients so that they can compete for valuable rankings in Google. So what I'm here to basically talk to you about is how to write content that isn't only high quality and effective in terms of engaging readers, but is also going to land you some important rankings in Google. So first of all, what you need to understand about achieving rankings is something about the Google's algorithms, basically. So the Google search algorithm it's a complex system that allows the search engine to find, rank, and return the most relevant pages for a given search query. So to be a bit more precise, the entire ranking system consists of multiple algorithms that consider various different factors like quality, relevance, authority. And there's various rank factors that underlie each of those, what determines the quality of your site and what determines how authoritative your site is. But one of the most important ones and one of the ones that people are most familiar with is keywords. So we're going to focus on that. While we're talking about keywords, I was just going to open up for a quick poll to see if anybody is familiar with, first of all, the term keyword density. And if you are, what do you think is the most optimal keyword density for written text on sites? So obviously, that is how often does a keyword need to appear in your text in order for it to be picked up by Google and basically promote your content for that particular result. So I will leave that with you and we'll come back to that shortly. So what we're going to talk about next is how to leverage keywords in order to actually write content. There we go. So obviously what everything Benedetta was talking about there in terms of writing high quality content, it applies for writing high quality optimized content. You just need to figure out a couple of different factors and use them in your blog writing when your main purpose is to achieve rankings. So the first thing to do is consider your keywords. So a keyword is essentially just a term that Google will use to return these results. You use it frequently throughout your text, and that shows that your text is relevant to anybody typing in that query. That's the basics of how it works. But as I said, there's hundreds of rank factors that go into that. But this is one of the best ways for you to start. It's the best place for you to start, when you're trying to create content that is going to compete for these rankings. So what you want to do is you want to select a series of keywords based on their relevance, how much search volume they're getting. So you use some software to basically check if people are actually searching for a keyword. You want to be able to see what is ranking for that particular term already as well. And you want to see if you have an opportunity to rank for it there. So some of that comes down to analysis and some of it comes down to intuition. As I said, you would need the software to check how many searches a particular term is getting. And you would need to understand the search engine results page to determine whether or not the opportunity is there for you to compete for that ranking. So if Wikipedia is in position 1 for a term that's getting 100,000 searches per month, it's unlikely that you are going to knock Wikipedia off that top page for that particular keyword. But there are ways that you could expand the term or tweak the search intent. It just comes down to that level of research and intuition, as I said. So that brings us on to how you then use the keyword to select a title for your content. What you want to do first off, once you've selected the title, is to vet your site for content gaps and see if there's anywhere that you could plug a hole, basically, as quickly as possible. And you use the search intent for that given keyword in order to do that. So I'll briefly explain what search intent is. Search intent is the way that the way Google perceives what people want when they type in a given term. So if they type something in, and again, 100,000 searches per month, and a Wikipedia article is coming up at the top, and a series of other maybe people also ask boxes, a lot of informational type stuff, Google has basically ranked that keyword, as having a research-focused intent. If you were to have a keyword that you typed into Google, however many searches per month, and it was bringing up a lot of Google ads, it was bringing up a product carousel along the top, you would basically be able to tell that has a lot of transactional intent. And you can use that to modify the language that you use in your title to then change the way that you write your text to basically maximize the SEO performance of the given content that you're writing. So it all comes down to, as I said, gap analysis, search intent, and what your objective is. Are you trying to write content that sells, or are you trying to write content that informs? So that then brings us on to the actual meat of how to write the content. And again, like I said, most of what, if not all of what Benedetta spoke about before, it applies here. Written quality is probably the most important rank factor when it comes to content. It doesn't matter if you stuff keywords galore into your content, but the writing is poor quality. You're very, very unlikely to achieve a valuable position 1, page 1, any point high in the rankings. You're just unlikely to get that with poor quality content. So what you need to do is you basically need to focus in on writing content that is going to engage users using the basic principles of good writing, as I said before. But what you also need to do, you need to bear in mind, obviously, with the science audiences, is that there is a tendency sometimes to lapse into an academic style, which doesn't necessarily fit a certain type of search intent. So as I said before, if you have a keyword which is bringing up a lot of transactional results, that informative but academic style isn't necessarily going to have a high conversion value to it, because it might be essentially preaching to the choir. You need to be able to, if you've got a transactional one, show the benefits of what you are trying to sell them as quickly and effectively as possible using concise language that is active as well, whereas the academic style tends to lapse into a bit of a passive kind of tone. But that, as I said, that isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. You can't necessarily say we need to be direct and engaging and salesy, because that's not going to fit all keywords. So you just need to be aware of how Google moderates its SERPs based on semantics, essentially. And again, just to reiterate, breaking up the content into smaller chunks, that's a really big one from an SEO point of view, and trying to give people other things for people to engage with as well on the page. So rather than just having to scroll through and read a load of text, if there is a video for them to stop and watch, or if there are images, graphics, things like that, anything to just break it up and make it more aesthetically pleasing. It's going to engage the reader, it's going to increase the time on page, and ultimately improve your SEO. But yeah, so we'll move on to the last point for how to actually write write these, which is how to finish them off. And the point of this is to essentially hammer home how important the CTAs are, so your call to action. And this segues again from what we were talking about with the academic style, because that is so passive, and because the tendency is to write in fairly long depth, and to give all of the information that we have available in one long format typically. That actually doesn't necessarily translate well to an SEO point of view. If you write an enormous piece of content, it can rank highly for multiple search terms, but you could chop that in 2, maybe even 3, release a series of blog posts that address multiple keywords and multiple intents. You can link through from each one of those to each other. You can use those to link out to other product pages or services pages, whatever your objective is, and ultimately drive traffic from the actual blog page throughout the site. So you want to achieve entrances with your blog post where users are finding your blogs in Google by typing in a search term. Google has flagged your content because it's relevant based on the keywords. Your users click through on it because the title is engaging, and they've scrolled through, they've engaged with the content, which is rich with multimedia formats, but they also then have the opportunity to link into other areas of the site where this might answer another aspect of the question, or this might be the product that you've promised me, and I'm now going to click through and request a quote. So that's the ultimate way of how this differs from typical writing. When the goal is SEO, you just need to think about a few of these things in a little bit more detail. That's how to write one blog post, but how do you make that work long term? It's very simple to say. You use those principles again and again and again, but you can use them from the get-go. Essentially, what you want to do is develop a content plan, which gives you a list of titles determined by keyword and search intent. And you can, as I said before, when you build out like a series of articles, you can plan that far in advance so that you know that you're going to be addressing these gaps down the line. You have a full workflow that may last months, that you know month to month, I'm going to be writing this article, then this article, and that addresses each of these steps in the consumer funnel, ideally driving people down towards those conversion pages that you really want to get people clicking through to. Just a couple of tips on how to actually do that. How obviously the basics of how to write the article apply to all of these when you're writing a full plan. But if you wanted to determine how to actually come up with one of these plans, I would take your keywords and then group them by a particular topic. And then when you're doing your gap analysis, try and find multiple niches that answer basic questions. And then, as I said, try and split those out into multiple posts instead of one. And what that tends to do, if you can nail that format, is it qualifies users who actually come through the funnel. They'll go from general interest to actual leads, and again, maximizes the conversion rate and ultimately your SEO performance. That's all well and good, but how do you then check that all of that you're doing, all of that work, because it is a fair bit of work, how do you check that it's actually working? So there are tons of metrics that you can use, and you can get a little bit lost in the weeds of how to actually prove the value of what you're doing. But most of it requires a bit of software to actually analyze. It's easily enough to use when you actually get into it. But as I said, you can get lost. If you use Google Analytics, there's a lot of different widgets and features that pop up, different complicated graphs that go all the way across the screen. What we typically do is we use analytics to track the page views and unique page views just to see how many people are actually looking at the content. I track entrances because that shows that the user has landed on that page first. So they've entered the site through the blog post, and you can correspond that to the source, which if the source is organic or Google, what that tends to show is that people have found you through Google and they've entered on this blog post, and then they've gone through and they've viewed X amount of pages. So that's one really good funnel to show how a particular blog post worked. You can also look at the exit rates to see if your calls to action are working. So if you've got upwards of 50% exit rate on your blog post, you know that more than half of people are landing on it and then leaving once they've read the actual article. It's not necessarily a bad thing because people have at least read it. But if your goal is to, redirect people throughout the site and ultimately get people buying your services and products, you don't want people leaving at any point, really. You should always try and drive that exit rate down as low as possible. And then the last thing, and one of the most important things you should also track, is the keyword rankings. So those keywords that you checked at the start that you determined are of high value to you, before you do any of this, just do a quick crawl through Google and see if you're ranking for any of them already. Do a benchmark report to just show, okay, for this keyword, we're not ranking anywhere. For this keyword, we're on page 3. And then start implementing this work and regularly refer back to that benchmark report. And if you see, okay, now we've got a page 1, now we've got a page 2, and if you see these increasing, that's a good marker for showing that obviously the success of the content writing strategy. And that wraps up my section. We're going to do the poll, are we?
Yeah, just before we take the next poll, so the answers for the first one. So we got a real mix of answers, as we thought we might. So it's the full range. So it's 4%, 25% plus for keyword density. The main ones 3.3 to 5%, 29% of people, 6 to 10%, 23% of people. Only 9% were 1 to 2%. Perhaps you could elaborate a little bit more, Ben.
Yeah, sure.
Before we run the next poll.
Yep. So 29% of people know their stuff. We work at 3 to 5%. I think some people have a very negative connotation that in order to actually use keywords effectively, we need to stuff the page full of keywords. And people seem to think that 25% plus is what we need to do. If you do that too much, if you put your keyword in at too high a frequency, there is no like hard and fast rule as to what frequency is too much. That will actually be a red flag, because Google is sophisticated enough now to say, we know what you're trying to do. Basically, we know that you just want to chase this ranking by stuffing it full of this particular keyword. But as I said, relevance is really important. And a page that just says COVID-19, COVID-19, COVID-19 again isn't necessarily relevant to whichever user is typing COVID-19 into Google. And you will automatically get penalized for doing that.
Yeah. Perfect. So yeah, like you're saying, Ben, the quality is important, because in the past, a lot of SEO agencies will have encouraged stuffing in keywords because it worked originally, didn't it? It was effective. It was an effective strategy once upon a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Prior to a lot of the updates that Google has done, such as the BERT update, which forefronted usability and the actual customer experience, the user experience, I should say. The actual quality has become so much more important than the amount of keywords that you've got. And as I said, we don't want to relegate keywords to the past, because they are still important and it is what determines relevance. But at the same time, quality should always be your front runner, I should say. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to run this next poll, which just to get a general feel for what the audience is doing at the moment. So the poll should be appearing upon your screen now. We just want to know if you optimize all your blog content for search engines at the moment. And whilst people are answering that, we'll move into the first Q&A section. So, wow, we've got lots of great questions. Thank you for these. So from Fiona, she's saying, as a generalist, how do you even begin to write about topics and complex subject matters that people have dedicated entire careers towards? Our board are very particular about outsourcing content. They don't trust anyone who doesn't have a PhD. Ben, I'm going to come back to you on this one, because I know this is a conversation you have fairly often with people. Your background's not in science. You're a creative writer. Mm-hmm. So what would you say to Fiona on this one? It is tough, because I completely understand that people have put the work in, and years of work to get to a level of experience with a particular field. It can be tough to think that somebody who doesn't have the exact same level of experience can effectively convey the benefits of a particular topic, or it can feel a little bit like, who is this person coming in who thinks that they can talk about this topic when we've done this much work for it and you haven't. As I said, I've worked on multiple different sites now, multiple different fields. I currently work for over 50 different clients, and that translates to thousands of blogs a year. What it comes down to really is a lot of research. And a lot of liaising with the clients as well. I'm not an expert on all of these scientific fields, but I can get a good grip of it just by doing a lot of research. I'm educated to master's level, so research was a massive part of that background. So I've at least got that. I use that to then essentially do a deep dive into the topics. and then work with the client to basically narrow that down to a series of topics that we want to focus on. And then either I or one of my team of writers will then work on the actual content. And then we will edit it with the client through a series of feedback loops, which is really, really important because, as I'm sure you probably know, even within particular really complex fields, there's specifics per client, there's specifics per niche, that an expert in one area of organic chemistry might not be able to write about another area because they've specialized so specifically. Sometimes being a generalist helps because we can kind of see the wood for the trees. We can work on it, and obviously it's never going to be at the same level of technical depth that somebody who has a PhD in this field is going to be able to generate. But the good thing is that we then hand the content over to that person who gets to polish it to the finished product. And between the two of us, or 3, 4, 5 of us, depending on the size of the company, we do get it to a standard that not only people internally can be proud of, but is also going to achieve results from what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So I guess when you answer the question, the proof's in the results from your experience.
Yeah.
Highlight those, and the conversation becomes a lot easier when you can show successes of the past. Benedetta, I think you'll be the best to answer this question from Daria. She's asking, if our target audience is scientists, how can we make our blog attractive for them through scientific journalism and not scientific writing as defined today?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. So I think that I don't think scientists necessarily all the time want to read like publications where it just lists the experiments and, you know, all the data. I think a lot of times scientists want that background information. They want that kind of like review article setup, but maybe not without much length. Maybe they don't have as much time to, you know, sit and read every single aspect of one paper. I think there's so much information out there that having that ability to have, you know, the scientific journalists condense it. And then, you know, if you do want to go back and read, and you're a scientist and you're able to understand the different experiments and the data that was published and you want to learn more about that, we always link the appropriate references. So that's always something that's available to you. But I think it's good to have, you know, that difference exists, just because not everyone wants to sit down and read. And this is coming from someone who practices science like on a regular basis. I don't personally always want to read papers all day long. I like to have that balance with everything. So I think it's appropriate for a lot of other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Emily, I want to bring you in because we haven't heard from you yet. Adam's asking about, and I know you're going to talk a little bit about this in your section, but he's asking about how many pictures should an article contain? Are there general rules for the number of images per words? I guess it's not overdo it. We don't want it to, the written word is still important, but breaking things up is also useful.
Yeah, I think breaking content up is really important. I wouldn't say there's a general rule to like how many images you should include, how many. I tend to stick with using them appropriately and use that as a guide. I think making sure they're placed appropriately. Obviously, I'll go over this in a minute as well. I think making sure they're placed appropriately, like don't just stick them in just for the sake of it. I think breaking them up makes it easy. I tend to say for a 1,000-word article, I'll put in 2, one at the start, one towards the end. But obviously, if you've got a really interesting piece of content and you've got a really good image or a video that would complement that, putting it in at the end of it isn't necessarily going to be a good tool either. So I think making sure they're placed properly and you're not overdoing it and just adding images to just break up the text. I think they've got to be placed really carefully. But I'd say there's no general rule. I think that if it works, it helps to complement the writing. I think throw them in, but don't just overdo it. Ben, I don't know if there's a kind of agree you could say if there's a rule for when you tend to optimize content, but
no, there's no particular rule. I typically, because my blogs are shorter, so I'll be writing like 500 word to 700 word pieces, whereas yours are probably approaching the 1,000-word mark sometimes. I also typically stick to just the one picture or video per post. It depends, because obviously you could have a series of smaller images. What I tend to do is I will put the post into the content management system and then put however many feels right and then preview it, and I'll just kind of do it like that. If it looks a little bit clunky or forced, if the formatting's a bit weird, then I'll just take one out and whatever looks best, essentially.
Completely agree, yeah.
And the other thing to consider is if you create your own videos and you embed those appropriately in articles, you can actually rank for those as well if you've optimized that for a title. So
Yeah.
now Google's obviously putting a lot of emphasis on other types of rich media. So if you have got appropriate media, then do use it. We'll take a couple more questions now, and then we'll move on to the next section, and we'll come back to the rest of the questions at the end. Ben, a quick one about meta tags. How important are they nowadays?
Yeah, still very important. So you need to make sure all the metadata in the back end of your site is implemented. You use your keywords to optimize your meta titles and meta descriptions, and ideally use however many pages you can. The ideal would be every single page that you have on site is optimized for a series of valuable keywords using the meta tags. But it's not always possible because some pages can't be optimized. Some pages, there's no point. It really does just depend. But where there's definite value for your products, your landing pages and things like that, definitely be using your meta tags.
Yeah, and then just quickly one from Connie before we move on. She's asking, what is an enormous piece of content? Anything for me. Anything that requires caffeine. What do you reckon?
It depends, because some people would say that the blogs that we write for an SEO point of view are on the shorter end of what people say is optimal for something to really rank. But it depends. Like sometimes people are literally just looking for a paragraph of text. What they type in can be answered in such a short snippet that Google might actually turn around and say, okay, 300 words is completely fine for this particular term. Something else, as I said, Wikipedia tends to rank quite highly for a lot of the terms that I'm trying to optimize for. It comes up again and again. And a Wikipedia article can obviously be several thousand words long. And I'm trying to compete with that with a blog post of just a few hundred words. So for me, for a blog post, anything over, I'd say 1,000 words is getting on. But I wouldn't let that dissuade people from writing big rock pieces of content that go on for multiple thousands if they really thought that was of value. But as I said before, for me, the chopping it up into smaller chunks typically engages people more and gives you more opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Guys, keep the questions coming. There's loads of really, really good ones. We will get to those at the end. I want to move on to Emily's section now. So, Emily, I'm going to hand over to you to talk to us.
Perfect. Yes, as Dave said, I'm Emily. I manage content across ASO Life Science, which is our new platform. And I work predominantly on news and medical as well. So I'm going to give you my top 3 tips in creating successful science content. I think blog posts are now really important nowadays. I think there's 2.5 billion blog posts per year that are going up, and over a third of websites are now also blogs. So I think making sure that you stand out from others and rank for what your important audience is really important. So I'm going to answer my first tip then, which is obviously knowing your audience. I think when you're generally creating a blog or when you're trying to create a new piece of content, I think try and work out what the purpose of it is. Why are you creating it? Are you trying to go for more of an informative approach, news style, article style? As Ben said, are you trying to sell or are you trying to inform people? I think that's a really important message to make sure that you've got right before you then go and just go for it. I think what type of audience you want is also really important because it helps you tailor the content. So a lot of I personally use is what would be my dream visitor, what would be my dream reader to my site. If you help to visualize in your head, like what would be your ideal customer to your website? Is it someone 25 to 40 working in industry? Are you going for more professional? I think then it can kind of help tailor that content and move it forward and make it more applicable to the kind of readers that you're looking for. In terms of audiences, I tend to go for titles such as what, how, why, go for more generic, like more people that tend to be Googling around a topic area. Whereas if you're looking to try to attract more of a niche customer, a niche audience, you'd go for more titles like comparisons of, applications of, that kind of thing that attracts, that can be quite a clear comparison between the two. And the last part of that is what message do you want to portray to your readers? I think having a clear vision and not sending out mixed messages and different types of content throughout your blog is really important. Try and keep it concise and separate. My second top tip is creating clear, concise and catchy content. It's now said that blogs are actually the 5th most trusted sources of information on the internet available. So making sure that you're giving out content that's actually factually accurate can not only help with Google, but it will also help your visitors coming back to your site again if they know that the content you're putting out there is A, engaging, and B, it's factually correct. So that's really important. So the first point, I've got 5 points under making content, how to make it the best possible content you can. which is making catchy, engaging, and exciting titles. It's my favourite part about my role. I personally absolutely love making titles. I've got hundreds. But the first thing that I'd say thought process-wise when creating a title is, if I'm scrolling through, say, Facebook at the end of my work shift, what would make me stop and read it? We spend so much time on our phones. What would make someone stop halfway through doing what they're doing and read on you? Does it grab their attention? I think if it grabs your attention, it would more than likely grab someone else's. Obviously, you can't use this rule for every piece of content, because obviously, if it's not something you're particularly interested in, you can't just go the process of, if I'm interested in it. But I'd use that as a general rule of thumb. It's something that someone would want to click on. Make sure there are a variety of titles and they're not too long. Obviously, as Ben says, for SEO and things like that, you don't want to make the title 2 or 3 sentences long. It's not really going to attract the reader unless you're going for a very, very niche specific topic. And also, when you're making titles, do your research. Is there a gap in the market? What other pages are ranking really well for that kind of information? Could you create a piece of blog content that would perform really well in that space as well? My next point, which is use quality and experienced writers. I think there was a question earlier about PhD and the fact that your board would only want PhD people. I think Google do really value EAT, which stands for expertise, authority, and trust nowadays. I think we work with over 100 scientific writers across every background imaginable, and we try to keep our content to say, for example, I use Benedetti, who's one of my freelance writers, as a perfect example. If I was creating a forensics toxicology or anything around that kind of drug discovery clinical trial space, I would then personally choose to use a writer like Benedetti, who has a master's in toxicology. It makes it relevant. It shows the reader that you actually know what you're talking about, and it just helps to engage them a bit more. So I think that's really important. And also, when it comes to using experienced writers, I think, especially over the last year, fake news has been such a prevalent part, and Google have really stepped up their game in identifying fake news sources and information that's not factually correct. And you don't want to be caught on the bottom end of that bandwagon if something went wrong. And also, when it comes to using experienced writers, don't be afraid to send out templates. So they're new and they've not wrote blog posts before. I think there's no harm in sending over a template that's got your meta description on, your keywords, maybe even subheadings. If it helps to create the flow of the content, helps to tailor it to a specific audience, go for it. I don't think there's any shame in doing that either. The next point, we've added quite a lot of questions on this one already, which is adding photos, images, videos, infographics, that kind of thing. I think you should definitely use it, but also using it appropriately. My personal favourite, and I try and use them wherever I can because I'm a fan of, is thoughts. I love them. I think they're really, really great. I think they can also give you like a perspective to say normal type of content. If you're just creating a standard blog piece, if you've got an expert in that area that's giving you a different opinion or saying like how this will transform our future, it really keeps to help the readers engaged. It keeps them reading further. I think using them appropriately is really, really important. I did address earlier, which is their placement as well. Make sure that you place them properly. Don't just run a random image in between 2 paragraphs. It just doesn't fit at all. Google will know that you've done it. It doesn't help. I think in terms of pictures, it should help the flow of the text. If it's something and you're sharing, say, a really long case study, adding pictures of results is a really great way to help explain it to the reader that's having difficulty understanding. I think that's a really good way of using them as well. And the last point on creating clear, concise, and catchy content is utilising social media. It's such a huge part of everything nowadays. I think everyone, I'm going to go on to a poll in a minute, but I think everyone has some form of social media or some kind of social media account on their phones or on their laptops or with work. I think you'll be stupid not to utilise the opportunity you've got right staring you in the face. But also, when you're tailoring content on social media, if you're looking for more of a US-based audience, there's nothing to stop you from scheduling posts that fit best around the US time zone. For instance, I'm based in the UK. I'm based in Manchester with Ben and Danny. But if I'm looking for a piece of content that I know particularly perform well in the US, I will try and tailor that content to go out around the best time. So if you're publishing a piece of content at 3 o'clock in the morning their time, the chance of you not getting as many views as if you post it at 8 o'clock in the morning when they're on their way to work can really massively help as well. And also encourage your readers to share your content. Don't just share it, invite them to share, invite them to interact with your content as well, and use hashtags. Everyone loves a hashtag. They're trend and they do really well. So I'm going to move on to a blog post, which is a poll, which is what social media channels do you use regularly? If you can click on as many that you use, that would be great. And we'll come back to that at the end. I'll give everyone a minute to submit and then I'll move on and then we can come back to social media channels that you use at the end. And the last top tip that I have is always check your progress. I think, as the saying goes, never leave things to chance. Don't launch a site or create a new piece of blog content and never check on it. Question is, how do you know if it's doing it? How do you know if it's performing well? How do you know if it's attracting the right kind of readers? I think checking weekly/monthly allows you to see how your content is and whether you are attracting them visitors and whether they're the right kind of visitors for what you need. I'd personally say checking weekly is good for things like visitor numbers, user numbers, and things like that. Whereas monthly, I would personally check things like SEO, keyword ranking. They don't change as often as weekly. You won't see yourself jump from page 4 of Google to page 1 within a week. I wouldn't say so personally, so I'd say leave that to more of a monthly/bi-monthly thing. But always monitor. So when you set up a blog post, think about how often you're going to check your progress. Is it going to be something you're going to do weekly, monthly? Scheduling time in your day to do it as well. Don't just say, oh yeah, I'll do it, and then never do it. What were you trying to achieve, and did you achieve it? What was the purpose of your blog? Was it to generate leads, engage a new audience, attract a new customer? Did you achieve it? I think checking this through a multitude of channels as well, such as social media, comments, visitor numbers, in-house analytics, rankings, as Ben's discussed. I think they're really important ways of seeing how well they performed. And are people enjoying the content? Are they leaving comments? Are they going to come again? I think that's really important. It leads me quite nicely onto my last and final point, which is don't shut off the negative. I know it sounds really tough to say, like, you will get negative comments. Everyone gets feedback when you launch something new. It's just part of life, unfortunately. And I think it's really extremely important to take into consideration feedback. I always use as a general rule of thumb. I'm giving you a lot of general rules of thumbs here, but they're really important. Which is, if people have taken the time to actually leave a comment on a blog piece or on your social media account, take the time to read it and at least understand what they're trying to say. It might help you progress further. It might also give you a different idea that you hadn't even thought of before, or a different way of trying things. It might be a case of actually you can explain more elaborate, like more technical terms, but easier, and then you can incorporate a glossary, things like that. It just gives you a different perspective and something you could help with. And also, if you respond to your readers, it shows that you can. It shows that you really do respect their opinion on what you're doing, and it will only encourage them to come back again if they think, actually, Joe, I left a comment thinking they'd never come back to me, and they did. It goes a long way. And yeah, so a little bit about the kind of websites I manage. So I work on news, medical/life sciences and ASO life sciences, and we generate over 10 million viewers a month. That is. So yeah, by using these tips and tricks, hopefully you should be able to increase the success of your content and be able to try something new. So yeah, we'll go back onto the poll, I think, Danny.
Yeah, so I'll come back to the social media poll in a second. I just wanted to wrap things up before we go into a bit more Q&A. So just a few things to take away from today. If you are struggling to find the titles in the registration, we asked what people found the most difficult, and finding a title was the number one, followed quickly by having the right time and resources. So if you're struggling to find titles, perform that gap analysis, consider the search intent and your objectives like Ben was discussing earlier on. If you're struggling to find the time, first of all, consider if blogging is important for your content marketing strategy. If it's not, then I don't think you'd be on this call. But if it's not, then don't waste any resources. If it is, then make sure you're allocating appropriate resources. It does take time to put together good quality content. And if you don't have that in-house, of course, you can work with a trusted partner. And finally, if you want to review your SEO strategy overall, then we will offer an SEO health check free of charge. There should be a link coming on the screen in a moment for you to, all you have to do is click on that, share your URL, and one of our team will get back to you with some ideas on where you're at. Emily, I wanted to come back to, the social media one first. So to be expected, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter are the main ones. Only 1% of people on Snapchat and 3% on TikTok, Benedette. So it's only you on TikTok, I think, and a couple of others. But the point's there. Everyone, or the very, very vast majority of people, use a social media channel to spend their time, to fill their gaps in their day, and to be entertained. So if you can think of clever and creative ways to interrupt people scrolling, then you're going to be able to draw people to your accounts and to your content. Emily, I wanted to pick up on the part you're talking about negative feedback and how it's so important as a sort of for your brand to make sure that you react to that and respond to that in a positive light, even if it is quite negative. I think of an example I had recently. Somebody replied to an email I sent out saying that my grammar was an abomination and I shouldn't be sending out emails. Obviously, I was a bit annoyed at first, and then I checked with someone, and it turned out it wasn't an abomination. But I still replied to the person because they'd taken the time to do that. So it's that showing that you care, and also if it's a public forum, other people in the future are going to be able to see how you react to your clients. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it brings it nicely onto point as well as in feedback with your writers and editors. I think it brings quite nicely round to that. I think if you're using a team of writers, and there are going to be, we have quite a public website, open access, so anyone all over the world can view it. And there are comments that are left. Obviously, if it's a writer that's had this particular feedback, I think having that open and honest communication between freelance writers and editors is really important. It helps you be able to share things with them, constructive criticism moving forward. Don't take everything to heart. There are going to be people out there, unfortunately, that will just leave comments. Sometimes they're useful. Sometimes it's just best off to reply to just say thank you. I appreciate you taking the time to leave this comment or consider it in future. I think being able to relay these in a positive light to freelance writers and not discouraging them from their work as well is really important. And building that kind of relationship where you feel you can go and approach writers. Also, writers being able to come and approach editors is a big problem. There shouldn't be a discrepancy in being able between communication there as well. So I think that's a really important point to raise. Yeah,
absolutely. We'll go back into the questions. We've had loads of great questions. I want to try and get through as many as we can. We are running a little short on time, so if we don't get to them, we will follow up with people after the webinar. So just a very quick one. Merlin's asking, where do you source your blog images? Well, you can create your own or use Shutterstock or any other resources people are using.
Yeah, make sure you use a copyright license if you're sourcing images. It's a big one. Make sure you source them properly.
Yeah, Jay, just be mindful of that. And if you're going to use free media ones, use reputable free media sites, because there are some that if you dig a little down into the actual copyright usage, it turns out that they're not free to use and you are opening up yourself to liability. So just be careful with that.
Yeah, and then Katie's asked a question that's it's going to be more about analytics. So she's asking, how can you tell what sort of audience you're attracting?
Oh, it's a tough one, that. So audience, so you can tweak the actual metrics on analytics. It can be quite complicated, but you can change it by location. You can change it so you can see where people are actually viewing things from. You can check by various different ones, including gender, age. We don't get things like profession through analytics. And it is also worth bearing in mind that all of this is perceived as well. So it's assumed that this particular user is male or female based on cookies. It's not based on them actually knowing it. So any detail that is based on demographics like that is always going to be a little bit contrived. It depends how valuable that information is to you, the demographics. I think most people are actually interested in the profession, which requires a little bit more tracking than analytics at the surface level can give you.
Perfect. Anne's asked about if we could repeat the long-term plan, starting with take keywords and go through niches and blog posts. And we won't go through that again now, but if you look in the handout section, there's loads of resources in there, including blog posts written by each of today's speakers, which covers a lot of what they've been talking about then. So I would encourage everyone to visit the handout section and to download those resources. Benedette, one for you about metaphors from Martin. Is it appropriate to be using those in the introduction?
I mean, to be honest, I really steer away from metaphors just because especially because like AZO and NewsMed are international sites, not everyone will understand the metaphors, especially if English is their second language. And also cultural, there might be a metaphor that we use in US that you guys might not even understand. So I think it doesn't really, especially in terms of science, it just doesn't really add too much value. I mean, I'd be curious what metaphor like someone would be thinking would be appropriate just to hear. But I personally I don't think I've ever even used metaphor. Emily, I'm sure I don't know if you've seen people using metaphors or not, or what you think about that.
I think I've seen it being used. I wouldn't say it's necessarily the best way to go about something. I mean, people use metaphors to show a hidden difference between two meanings. But I think you should be able to do that without using a metaphor in your article. I don't think using a metaphor could convey that difference is the best way to go about it. Having maybe a separate subheading and addressing the misconceptions or addressing similarities and differences is probably a better way to go about it than using a metaphor, as Bernadette said. It could be mistrayed or misinterpreted between different readers. So yeah, for sure.
I'll just chime in there, and I'll sadly have to agree with you. Even though I love a metaphor, I just never find it's never appropriate to actually use them.
Yeah.
Because as you say, like, there's no telling that somebody in a completely different country is going to understand what the hidden meaning is here. What does this actually refer to? And the point of the metaphor, assuming, is to basically try and make something intelligible to somebody by comparing it to something that they get. By using that metaphor, you're assuming that they are going to understand the other thing, and that's not necessarily a given. So you might just be confusing people, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think everyone's agreed there. Ben, what about thoughts on images and video affecting site speed and how to balance that? So in one of the most recent Google updates, site speed became one of the main factors for ranking. So any tips for using smaller image sizes, embedding videos, I guess, rather than uploading them to your CMS? Anything else that you can think of?
Nothing other than those ones. Yeah, don't be uploading the videos, definitely, because that will start to eat up your site speed. I haven't worked with any clients where too many images has become a problem for their site speed from an SEO point of view. So I think it's something that you might worry about unnecessarily, provided you're, as you said, using the smallest possible image formats that still gives you the good quality, and you're embedding videos instead of uploading them. You should be fine.
Yeah, and there's plenty of resources available where people can keep track of their website speed. So yeah, I think it's something we'd recommend every month, making sure that it's the speed on both desktop and mobile is high, because it does impact your search ranking. We are coming to the end of the hour. We are going to carry on with these questions because we've had so many great ones. If you do have to leave on the hour, then I would encourage you to have a look in the handout section to download the resources. There's lots of great stuff in there that will help you out. We're going to move on to a question from Sue, and she's asking, where do you suggest a blog page should live within a website? In a section on resources, example, along with your webinars, podcasts, other things. And then there's a second question about this. Do you feel the blog page can be successful if it covers multiple customer segments, disciplines? Ben, if I ask you the second part about segments and disciplines, then I've got some thoughts on the first part that I'll share after that.
Yeah, sure. It absolutely can be effective covering multiple disciplines. You don't need to hierarchically segment your site into clear buckets based on where they live, basically in the location on the site, because people are going to find, if we're talking about it from organic, and people are coming to the site through Google, they're not necessarily going to visit every page on your site. It's very unlikely that they will visit more than 4 pages on your site. So if they land on an article that is specific to their field, and they do engage and they click through, you're presenting links to them that are relevant to their field. So they basically stay within a particular niche on site anyway. The blog can overarch all of these. It doesn't have to be split out so that these are narrowed into these individual columns from what we call the taxonomy point of view, because they're clustered together by topic, which is determined by internal links and keywords. The actual hierarchy is literally just a way to build your sitemap so that it's a clear location for all these articles to go. So they don't necessarily need to be split into different locations based on subfield, essentially.
Yeah. And then just about the part about where the blog should live, I guess it depends on whether you're a resources first website or a products first website. And if you want to test which drives the most traffic, we've been doing a lot of work on conversion rate optimization at the moment, where we use a software where we can change the navigation. So a certain number of IP addresses will come to the site and the navigation will look in one way. And then the rest of the people will come on the website and it will be mixed up. So the blog might be first, the products might be first. over the course of, say, a month, this will provide us with really good data that then we can make decisions about how our layout and our sort of overall user experience of the website should be. So if that's something you're interested in, Sue, I hope that helped with that question, then please get in touch and we can talk about that some more. We've had a question from Stephen. He's asking, how do you think about keyword cannibalism coming from multiple posts targeting the same keyword? Ben, that's probably for you again.
Yeah. So that depends. So what our typical strategy is that we will optimize we'll optimize as many landing pages on site as possible. So if we stick with the products example, and we want people to be going to the products and filling out RFQs, and we're going to use our blog posts to do that. And what we're going to do is we're going to optimize the product page for a series of keywords, and then we're going to write a series of articles that target those same keywords. So technically that's cannibalism because we've got multiple pages competing for the same term. But the basic definition of keyword cannibalism kind of ignores the fact of there being long tail terms within that. So if we look at Emily's example from before of when you come up with titles that are based on what plus keyword, how plus keyword, or applications of plus keyword, yeah, you are using the same keyword again, but you are also using longer tail versions of it. So what is keyword is its own phrase essentially. So that blog post is competing for the entire length of that. And then through internal linking is funneling authority back to the main page, which is optimized for the shorter tail term. So you're not exactly cannibalizing it. You're always funneling traffic back to that and signposting that landing page as the important one. That might essentially look like cannibalism. Well, there's a method in the madness in that you're constantly competing for longer tail rankings and funneling people down to the shorter tail keyword.
Perfect. And there's a couple more on SEO, Ben. So we'll
bring them to me. Go on. Yeah.
So Adam's asked, how far through the article should we start linking to other parts of the website? And Daria's asked, how many keywords a page can be optimized?
So it depends. I'll go with the first one. So I would typically say you should at least have to scroll before you're getting any links from the page, because that might confuse some of the metrics. It's also going to not show very good engagement because if somebody does scroll, well, if somebody sees a link straight away, clicks and leaves the page, it could look at a really high exit rate, a high bounce rate. It's not going to look great. And it's going to skew your engagement. So if you at least force people to scroll down before they get an opportunity to go somewhere else, I'd go with that. And then you can have a few towards the bottom of the page as well. Could you just remind me of the other one? Was that how many keywords per page?
Yeah, so how many keywords a page can be optimized? Sure.
So it depends on the length of the keywords. If I just remind myself here, the meta title, optimal meta title length is between 30 and 65 characters. So however many keywords you can fit into 30 to 65 characters is a good rule of thumb, but sometimes that's going to look really long. It's going to look a bit clunky, and you just basically need to kind of play that by ear. 2 to 3 keywords is normally achievable depending on the length of them. If it's a long tail keyword, it might just be one.
Perfect. And we'll just do a couple more questions and then we'll wrap things up. Emily, maybe this one would be best for you. So the idea within scientific writing or journalism is how you're not supposed to be the expert. So how do you communicate to the experts that your content will be relevant, valuable to their level of readers?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like, a lot with scientific writing, you aren't the person that's carried out the research, you aren't the person that's conducted the experiment. And being able to convey that in a way that shows that you're still relevant and you're still, I think it comes from building up your website's reputation, your brand reputation over time. Obviously, the more visitors you get, the more reputable you'll be, the higher you'll appear on Google, and the more likely people are to click on you. So that's kind of one aspect of how you'd show that you're relevant and valuable. Also, I think the type of writing you use, advertising the fact that you are writing content with specific experts in that area, I think really helps. And also showing that you know your stuff. Results, as Ben said earlier, results are everything. I think if you can show people through results and through analytics, for example, Ben said earlier he's actually not a scientist by trade, but give Ben a topic on anything and Ben can write it literally. I think that's also showing through results and through search engines. I think that's another way of really showing that you can be relevant and you can break down really long, lengthy journal articles into something that people can digest and understand without having to read a 20 long article. I think, yeah. Ben and Benedetta, have you got anything on that one?
I was just going to piggyback off what you were saying, then, that you are right that sometimes there's in terms of like feedback and in terms of how people perceive generalists not being able to write specific topics. Sometimes you do just have to prove it. You have to be able to turn around and say, look, here are the results, it worked. And they're not going to be convinced that somebody who isn't an expert in the field is going to be able to write about it until they see, well, actually, however many thousands of people per year disagree because they read the article and they clicked through. So yeah, people might not, it might not be Shakespeare, but it's bringing people to your site. And is that not what it's all about?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. We'll finish off with this one, Benedetta, for you, I think. So from a scientist's perspective, what type of content do you prefer? There's this idea of white papers and ebooks, longer pieces. Is that generally right, or does it depend? Is it a mixture of the two?
So I think generally, like especially bench scientists, the time is just like the most important thing. So I think most of the time, especially during the day when they'll be having the time to read, is like in between experiments. So I think unless it's something that is like very specific to what, at least me personally, if it's very specific, something that I really need to know, then I'll save that white paper, save that ebook, and then I'll read at a later time. But if it's just something that I kind of just want to get a refresher on or just get a little bit more information, I think having that type of article, like something really condensed, really easy to read, that's visually like pleasant to look at, I think that's something that I would prefer on a day-to-day basis. And then again, just when I have more time, and it just, I think, would have to be something really like that I really want to spend, like an hour reading rather than 15, 20 minutes, like just getting a better idea of something.
Awesome. I think that's a great place to finish things up today. So thank you to the three of you guys for sharing your expertise. Thank you to everyone in the audience who's joined us today and for loads of really, really good thought-provoking questions. Our next webinar is going to be about creating an effective B2B social media strategy. We talked a little bit about the importance of social media in this one, but that will go into much more depth. That's going to be on the 30th of June. And there's a link on the screen now. You can click on that to register. If you do need help with your blog or with your marketing strategy in general, then you can get in touch with the team at azonetwork.com, or you can reply to the thank you email that I'll be sending out in the next 24 hours, and I'll point you in the direction of the best person to help. You can connect with Ben, Emily, Benedetta, myself on LinkedIn. I'd really encourage you to do that. You can find the links in the handout section, along with lots of other marketing resources, including our 2 latest marketing reports, which you should hopefully find really useful. Thank you, Benedetta. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Emily, for sharing your time. And to everyone in the audience for joining us from across the world. Please do take 30 seconds to share your feedback with us on the survey form that will appear on your screen once we're done. Thank you again, and we will see you all again soon, hopefully. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys. Thank you.